Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We're champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Sero Boost. And on this week's episode, we are going to talk about the role of oxytocin in love. I'm very intrigued about this topic. You know, it's the new year for us here when we're recording this episode, and I'm sure a lot of people are exploring different aspects of happiness, including love. And today we have in our studio Dr. Love, who is perfect for this podcast. And this is actually our second run of trying to record this episode. I'm hoping it's going to be even better than the last, because I remember last time we had a lot of fun, even though we couldn't finish due to technical difficulties, remote recordings. But I'm just glad we can make it happen, Paul, because you're from the other side of the world. So first of all, let me introduce you to our audience, and then I'll get you to share a bit more about yourself, because you have such an amazing background. And, you know, the nickname Dr. Love, I'm like, oh, when would I ever talk to a Dr. Love again, Paul is the founding director of the Center for Neuroeconomic Studies and professor of economics, psychology, and management at Claremont Graduate University. Paul is also the founder of Immersion neuroscience. Paul's research on oxytocin and relationships has earned him the nickname Dr. Love. That's cool. He's all about adding more love to the world. Thanks so much for joining us again, Paul. And please share a bit more about this with us. You know, it's so fascinating that all this work and all this research has led to what you're doing now. I think you've got 2 books so far, if I'm not wrong. And
I think it's 4. And really, I'm really interested in taking the research and turning into practical uses. So both sharing that with audiences in books and creating software programs that people can use to live happier, healthier, longer lives. What could be a better use of my time than that, right? That's the best.
Yeah, absolutely. So what led you to this path in your career? You know, because I'm sure it's not accidental. There's got to be a story behind it.
I guess, do you want the honest story or the dishonest story?
Well, obviously we're here for the honest story, so let's hear it.
The honest story is that, research takes you in different directions. And when you find areas that are just unknown and, asking for explanation, you really want to dive into that. And the early work I did at Oxytocin was the first to show that oxytocin is the signal of someone being trustworthy. And we really dug into that. That got us into psychiatry, got us working with criminals, got me doing field experiments in the military and Papua New Guinea and the rainforest. I mean, it went everywhere. And so we really began to understand the underlying basis for human sociality and cooperation. And I think, that strangers can very easily cooperate almost all the time among humans is a very unusual behavior. And so trying to characterize what promotes or inhibits cooperative behaviors is, I think, very important. And then again, it extends into psychiatry, into medicine, and into tools that people can use to be happier and healthier.
Very cool. Well, I mean, there's just so much that I'm sure you can talk about today, but with the span of this topic, I guess we're just going to focus more on that, aspect of oxytocin and love. And I believe we discussed earlier as well in the questions, we might mention, some aspects related to organizational cultures and things like that. So I'm sure, our audience would probably be wondering, like, why oxytocin? I thought this is just about personal relationships. Why does it relate to organizational cultures and things like that? Which is probably the most interesting part of the conversation. But before we get there, I'm going to introduce you a bit further to our audience through the section called Have You Met Paul? Now, you've done this before. We did it last time. I wonder if your answers have changed. And we have 5 questions, as you know. So let's go through them. First thing first, what is a book that you read all the time?
I think read all the time is not fair, but one of my favorite business books is The Experience Economy by Pine and Gilmore. Really wonderful book applying theater to business.
That's a new one for me. That's very interesting. Gotta jot that down for later. Now, what is a movie that you would recommend to anyone?
A movie from the 1980s called Wings of Desire by the German director Wim Wenders.
Also new to me. Very interesting. Now, you're our guest today on the podcast, but a lot of our guests actually don't listen to podcasts. I wonder if you do listen to podcasts, and if yes, what is your favorite one?
I do on and off. I like Joe Rogan because he comes in asking, quote, naive or stupid questions and gets people to really open up.
Yeah, we're a huge fan of Joe Rogan on our team as well. We talk about his podcast all the time, trying to learn from, what we can take in terms of production as well as content. Very interesting. And our next question originally was about a famous role model, but, it's kind of unfair because a lot of people have role models who are people in their lives. So I wonder who your role model is if you have one.
I don't really have role models. I am very interested in people who achieve extraordinary outcomes in their lives. So I think Elon Musk is interesting. I'm reading a book on Tesla right now. So I think anyone who has exceeded what people thought they could do, I think are very interesting to me.
Yeah, it's kind of like a mosaic of different people that influence us in life. It's not necessarily one person, right? And that's what I've learned from a lot of our guests on this show. Sometimes people mention 5 different people that have influenced them through the course of their lives. And, it changes through the seasons of your life too. And I've found that it's kind of the same for me. Last question in this part. Now, I know you're kind of like an educator at heart because you're doing all this work to educate people. And so for you to do this education, I'm sure you learned a lot too. So what is a course that you've learned that really left a strong impact on you?
Yeah, I think the first neuroscience course I took as an undergraduate really changed my life, taught me to critically read literature and not accept something as written as true. And I think that's very important. Critical thinking is essential.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing. Very interesting insights into who Paul is. And now that we've got to know you a bit better, let's talk about today's topic, the role of oxytocin in love. This podcast is about happiness. So first thing first, let's put things into context. And I would love to hear from you how you think of happiness. It could be a personal definition or just the way that you view happiness in life.
So I'm going to answer all these questions from the scientific literature, from a neuroscience, but my neuroscience hat on, Lou. So I think my view is irrelevant. So happiness is an acute, positive state in which you feel fulfilled, you feel engaged, and you're able to do many more things than you can when you're not happy.
That is very interesting because, a lot of the guests on the show also talk about happiness from a scientific perspective. And also, I think there have been a few concepts floating around when it comes to happiness, and I don't remember the exact terminologies, but I do know that one of the things that people tend to discuss a lot about happiness is, it's not something that is always there in our lives. It's gonna come and go. It's kind of like, it's like a goose chase. If you chase happiness, it's never gonna come to you.
Right, exactly.
And it's kind of fascinating as well when it comes to today's topic, right? Because love, oxytocin, kind of like one of those aspects of happiness that people are kind of like, some people just have it, some people don't, and they view it in that sense. But I think it's interesting when you put the scientific hat on and you think about it in the aspects of how it adds to our lives. So since you're Dr. Love, how do you think about that?
So let's for listeners, let's kind of dig into that scientific approach a little bit. So the brain works on changes, on contrast. So if you are optimally happy all the time, then it would be like you're satiated. You have no place to go. And so the brain processes that allow us to be happy induce a metabolic cost. We can't be happy all the time. Otherwise, we have no drive. We have no motivation. We're not looking for new things to do to make us happy. So I think we should be very clear on that. So when I started looking at positive social interactions, and we know that a lot of our life satisfaction comes from the quality of our relationships, I wanted to know the mechanisms that promote or inhibit things like trust, things like gratitude, things like generosity. And in the animal literature, happened across this neurochemical called oxytocin that in animals identifies members of one species as familiar or safe. And we began to run experiments on humans measuring the brain's release of this neurochemical. We also did studies where we can infuse synthetic oxytocin into the human brain safely. And what we found was that oxytocin motivated greater emotional connection to other people, right? So now we're getting really close to happiness, right? So if I feel closer to my wife or closer to my work colleagues, then it becomes a more enjoyable experience to be around them. So as social creatures, we only thrive when we're around other human beings, but being around others can induce frictions or it can induce joy. And so oxytocin is this indicator that the value I'm getting from this relationship is positive.
Very interesting. And, we are supposed to talk about oxytocin in more detail. But before we get to that part, what I was picking up from what you were saying earlier was quite insightful in the sense that a lot of people are chasing happiness, looking for happiness. And that leads them to the complete opposite of, feeling really miserable or, feeling like they're getting nowhere. And I really like that you pointed out that that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions people have, right? Like being happy all the time is the goal and it's great. It's actually not that great if you're happy all the time because exactly what you were saying.
Happiness is a result of doing things that connect us to others. And so one of the paradoxes of let's broaden that. So if I look at my life satisfaction, that's adding up all my happy and sad experiences. So people who are living satisfied lives, who are flourishing, who are thriving, tend to have close social relationships with coworkers, with friends, with family, with romantic partners. So how do I have those relationships? I need to invest time, energy, emotions into those relationships, right?
Yeah.
And so even if I'm the most selfish person ever and I want to live a satisfied life, it means that I have to serve others. So that's the interesting paradox, is that we've got to be connected and serve others. So after we're done here, Lou, I'm going to go have happy hour with 6 of my best friends, and we're going to goof around and tease each other and hang out. And that to me is investment in those relationships, right? If I don't invest in them, if I don't put time into them, why would that relationship be valuable to me? And again, there's basically 4 things you can control that improve your life satisfaction: diet, exercise, sleep, and the quality of your social relationships. So the first 3, easy to measure. And the 4th is new technology that we've just released for free from my group that allows people to measure the neurologic quality of those relationships and to actually have a ring to close every day like you do for steps. So I'm getting enough high quality social interactions to stay emotionally fit. Just like I can be physically fit, I need to be emotionally fit. So emotional fitness leads to a longer and healthier life, leads to greater happiness. Boom. We just closed the whole circle.
Yeah, that is so interesting. It's like, you're reminding me of like those rings on the Apple Watch. Like, you have completed your exercise, or like you have completed your steps count. If there's one for that on the Apple Watch for relationships, that's the next level.
That's what
Apple.
Done.
Yeah. That's very fun. Now, let's talk about oxytocin and love, because that's what we're here to talk about. You already mentioned oxytocin briefly and the chemical aspect of it. A lot of our audience here, if they are tuning into the show, chances are they don't know much about neuroscience. That's why they're here, because they want to learn. So in simple terms, how would you define this chemical of oxytocin? Maybe there are things that you haven't mentioned yet. You sort of briefly mentioned some aspects of it before, but I'm curious, what else is there that we should know?
Right. So oxytocin is a neurochemical made in the brain, released both in the brain and in the peripheral nervous system in the body. That does a whole variety of things, like most neurochemicals in the brain, but it appears to have the core function in the brain of identifying who around you should interact with. So that leads to cooperation, that leads to a reduction in stress levels. For human beings who are around strangers all the time, we've got to have some indicator that said, Lou, perfectly safe, want to hang around with her, and your producer, Aiden, clearly a sketchy dude, don't want to hang out with him because I'm getting a bad feeling, right? So we didn't have that in our brains. We could just live in big societies and cities, work in buildings with all kind of weird people. So anyway, of course, I'm kidding, but we have to have that in there. So think of oxytocin release as an index of the quality of that relationship.
Very
So in other words,
interesting.
you're great, Lou, but if my daughter comes in and gives me a hug, my oxytocin will be higher than when I'm talking with you.
Absolutely. I hear you. That's very interesting because I guess this is, from my perspective as someone who doesn't know much about neuroscience or the chemicals, like the brain chemicals. I'm still learning. And also, just take a pause to tell our audience in case they don't know who Aiden is. He's our wonderful assistant video editor here in the studio. We're talking, he's the one that helps us set up all the podcasts. And I can confirm he is very safe to be around, very fun as well. And that is also the point I would like to make. I did not know that oxytocin exists within all relationships, because a lot of people mention oxytocin in the context of romantic relationships. And so this is probably a new thing for me and for a lot of people in our audience. Would you think so, Paul?
It is. So this is a uniquely mammalian neurochemical, although there are precursors in other species. But in mammals in particular, it's responsible for those really core differentiators of mammalian behavior: care for offspring, in some species, long-term attachment to partners, to raise offspring. The human brain is really unique in that we have many more receptors for oxytocin than any other species. So we're acutely sensitive to social emotional information. And oxytocin is one of the neurochemicals among a suite of those that activates a network in the brain that allows us to function and even thrive around complete strangers.
Yeah, that's very interesting, especially for me, because I don't know much about this area of the brain. Now, we sort of briefly touched on this earlier when we talked about the relationship between oxytocin and happiness. And kind of to summarize your word, I think what you were saying is oxytocin sort of exists in all relationships to kind of nurture, how close we are to, different people. And the higher the level of oxytocin is, the closer you are and the better the relationships are. And that improves happiness, because you were talking about the different 4 aspects of happiness, one of which is, would be our relationships. Would there be anything else that you would add to this in terms of the relationship between oxytocin and happiness?
Right. So kind of 2 things. One is, again, happiness, this acute emotional state, and then long-term life satisfaction, or this kind of longer-term view. So oxytocin interacts with another neurochemical, dopamine, that makes us feel good to be around others. So now we have this interesting dance between these neurochemicals. And what we've done from a technology perspective is capture those signals coming out of the brain from the cranial nerves and create an index, an easy to understand 0 to 100 index that shows you second by second the value of the interaction you're having. So that's the source of this ring. I need to have enough, I call this all this dopamine oxytocin interaction immersion. I need to have enough peak immersion moments in my brain to have really high value, right? So if I sit in my room or my lab all day, don't talk to anybody, I'm not getting a lot of these peak social emotional experiences, and I'm degrading my emotional fitness. So again, what it means I've got to be out there. We got to return to the office. You can't work at home every day in your pajamas. I'm sorry. You've got to go out and do things. This is why things like travel, having new adventures with people you care about, really tends to spike that ability to have an immersive experience.
Very interesting. I think that's a good reminder to our audience too, because I think a lot of people like me work from home most of the time still after the pandemic. And I actually go to the studio once a week to do this fun thing of, talking to guests like yourselves and interacting with Aiden. And sometimes I think about it and I reflect on the past 2 years of, working from home quite a bit. And I realized that the happiest days of my week would be the one that I actually go to the studio and have this social interaction. And I actually realized this is the only social interaction I have on some days. And that is kind of interesting because, I used to live alone and I didn't go to the office. And I was like, why did I feel weird during those times? And now I know why. This is it. Exactly what you were describing. Yeah.
And to go further, so social withdrawal, people who are socializing with others less and less, is a very strong predictor of poor mental health, of anxiety disorders, and actually a whole variety of medical disorders are preceded by social withdrawal. So for listeners, if you find yourself socializing less, then kind of force yourself to go out, call up a friend, or because these brain systems that oxytocin activates are very evolutionarily old, they're deep in the brainstem, they will activate with almost any simulated social interaction. For example, watching a movie, right? So Lou, we can tell the listeners now is fair. We can reveal our secret that you and I are both big movie criers. Well, you're having an emotional experience, right? So you can watch a movie, cry, or have that, and you'll still increase your immersion. You can play with a dog. A dog is a very social creature. We've created them to be our friends. And so if you are lonely, then there are things you can do. If you don't feel like you can go out and meet people, you can go volunteer. You can join. I do a lot of hiking with my dog, Lou. And so I started feeling bad about those nice volunteers that clear the trails. I'm like, I'll volunteer to clear the trail. I tell you, I was out there and everyone who went by thanked me for helping. I'm like, I get it. Now I understand why people volunteer. You get this immediate feedback. It feels good to be a helper person. So again, we're coming back to, you have to be of service to others to actually live a fulfilled life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a beautiful message you shared there. And, so happy to hear that you volunteer to help too. Now, you mentioned the word immersion earlier, and so I have to go there. This is your book. So you've got a book called Immersion, The Science of the Extraordinary and the Source of Happiness. Now, we're here to talk about oxytocin, love, happiness. I would love to hear what the book is about. I haven't read it yet. I haven't got the opportunity to do so. And sure, our audience, they might be wondering, okay, Paul, what did you write in this book? How does it relate to the topic of the day?
Right. So you've been to the Department of Motor Vehicles, Lou. You've been to, I don't know, whatever your least favorite store is. And so many experiences we have in life are just terrible. They're either frustrating or mundane. And so we've shown is that we can identify using this neurologic state called immersion that captures the value of social emotional experiences, an objective way to assess whether experiences are boring, frustrating, or extraordinary. And it turns out from a business perspective, customers will pay more and will be loyal when they have extraordinary experiences. And they will also avoid going to places where the experiences are bad. Moreover, when you can extend these peak immersion experiences, you build up your emotional fitness, as I said earlier. And so there's a real reason for organizations, for-profit, nonprofit, governments, to create extraordinary experiences so that people will spend more money with them, but also have these amazing experiences. So I'll give you a concrete example. Many years ago, I was in Australia, and I was checked into the Four Seasons Hotel in Sydney, right? You got to fly from Sydney. I'm in Los Angeles, takes forever to get there. And was there for a couple of days, drove out to Canberra. Can we agree the world's most boring city in the world? Canberra. Sorry, Canberra people.
Yeah, sorry, but can confirm.
Dropped off my car and then took a taxi back to the Four Seasons in Sydney to spend another couple of days there before I flew home. It's a long flight. I'm going to hang around Australia. When I got out of my taxi, the doorman said, "Welcome back, Dr. Zach. Here's your room key. We're all ready for you." Wait, hold on. I'm getting out of a taxi. How the heck do they know that it's me? How did they know I was there before? He had my room key ready. I didn't have to check in. I mean, it was like, now, subsequently, I figured out how the Four Seasons does this, but I still remember that from 15 years ago, that you're tired, you've been driving, it's a hassle to travel. And I felt like, oh, this is a place that really cares about me. Now, when I travel and they say, hey, we can put you at the Four Seasons or the Marriott, wherever, I'm like, put me at the Four Seasons. It's going to be perfect. And it always is. So thank you, Four Seasons people. But again, it's those stories that are interesting because these high immersion, peak immersion experiences are saved in the brain in a very particular way. We can remember them, we can relive them, they're enjoyable, we're back to happiness, and they want us to repeat those experiences. Our brain says, hey, this was great. Why would you stay anywhere else with the Four Seasons? They love you. They're really taking care of you. Does that make sense? And so by measuring over 50,000 brains, the book describes how you can create better marketing, better entertainment experiences, better education and training, how generally you can live your life for greater happiness.
Yeah, that's very interesting because it kind of would make our audience think, right? Love sounds a lot like romantic relationships, but I guess that exists in all different relationships that exist in the world.
Yeah, love in the broad sense, right? In the
absolutely
kind of Greek sense, philia, right? This kind of attachment or care for others. And so if you are cared at a business, you're like, oh, they know my name. Here's my pet peeve. Go to Starbucks. swipe my thing. They, what's your name? I'm using the goddamn app. Look at the app. Why, I don't know why Starbucks doesn't know it's me before they have to ask me my name, right? So
Right.
again, there's a kind of, they just don't care. They're going through the motions. Now, people at Starbucks are generally fine, but little things like this personalization at scale makes you feel like, as a customer, oh, they know me. This is better for me, right? You should greet me.
Yeah.
Hey, you paying with your Starbucks app? Yeah, scan it right now. Oh, hey, Mr. Zach, welcome back. Hey, last time you got a black iced tea, which is like the same thing. That's a much better experience than, who the hell are you? What's your name?
Yeah. What's the point of that loyalty card, right? If they're not gonna remember or use it. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think this is something that is extremely hard to do in our personal lives, but not that hard when it comes to systems that organizations have. And I know a lot of people who have their whole personal system to remember people that they've met and what particularly about that person that they can bring to the next conversation. And I guess that brings oxytocin to the conversation too. Like we've met before, Paul, and at the beginning of the conversation I was kind of like, Paul, we've done this before, right? I didn't really remember exactly what we were talking about. And, that might have made you feel like, oh, you didn't remember me? But then at the same time, I've had a lot of guests and I don't really have a system. So that reminds me, next time, perhaps I should have a system. What do my guests remind me of? What the most interesting part of the conversations were about. Anyway, we can learn a lot from this, not just from a business perspective, but also in our personal lives to improve the quality of relationships. Because I think relationships tend to die when you forget the little things.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And even if it's friendships, even if it's family members, I think sometimes we take family for granted as well. But, you can kind of spike this immersion system in the brain if you do something unusual. So for the people who are single listening, you go on that first date, book a helicopter ride, go on a roller coaster, do something that's really exciting. That's like 10 first dates, right? So anything that kind of accentuates that experience, adds a little bit of excitement or fear or something. Don't go skydiving on your first date. That's too much probably for most people, but something that's a little bit unusual, exciting. So think about that with your current romantic partner, with your family members, certainly with my friends. I have adventure friends, so we always do crazy stuff all the time. And man, you really get to know people when they're under stress, when you're tired, when you're traveling, when you're doing something dangerous, like you've got to really trust those people because, they're kind of, I've done things where my life depends on other people. And man, you get to know people really well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as we've established, this hormone, this chemical in our brain, oxytocin, is not just affecting romantic relationship, but relationships with other individuals in our lives. So let's break it down and talk about these two different aspects, because I'm sure our audience start to wonder, okay, you talk about love. What kind of love are you talking about? So first thing first, most people would probably tune in for the romantic relationships part because, the word love, it just sparks that. So let's dive deeper into the hormone of love, oxytocin, as what it is called. And a lot of common people like myself who are not, interested as much or we don't study neuroscience. We don't have a background in it. We know oxytocin, love. I know that much. Now, how exactly does oxytocin impact our romantic relationships, and how can we utilize that to improve them?
Right. So again, we're talking about oxytocin as a neurochemical. So hormones are active outside the brain. So we're talking about the brain level of oxytocin. So no discussing hormones here.
Okay. Yes.
So this neurochemical is released when we engage in romantic interactions. So everything from sex to holding hands to kissing, all those will release oxytocin and they form attachments. So unless you're just hooking up for one night, even that oxytocin is released. But when you form long-term attachments, oxytocin helps stabilize those attachments so that as humans, most of us form these long-term monogamous relationships where we stay with one person romantically for long periods of time. And oxytocin helps stabilize those relationships. Again, evolutionarily, we do that because you need two parents, if possible, to raise kids. Kids with two parents end up doing better than kids with one on average. There are lots of exceptions. And so it's this kind of bonding chemical, right? So that is very unusual in the animal kingdom. So less than 5% of mammals have long-term pair bonds, that is males and females who stay together long-term, as opposed to the male mating and then disappearing, which is the standard model for most animals. And so again, we're unusual. And one of the ways oxytocin does that is by increasing our empathy for others. And so I think you had mentioned earlier, it was in the notes, my first book called The Moral Molecule. So one reason that oxytocin motivates positive or pro-social behaviors is that if I release oxytocin, it increases my empathy. And if I do something towards you, Lou, that would hurt you emotionally or physically, I would feel that pain. That's what empathy is, right? Sharing the emotions of somebody else. And so once we share those emotions, we tend to treat people better. So, of course, the core question is, well, why do we have violence? Well, because a lot of factors inhibit the release of oxytocin. For example, high levels of stress, high levels of testosterone, right? We see most of the crime done around the world is done by young males who have very high testosterone levels, right? So that inhibits this relationship. So when we are in long-term relationships, our testosterone falls. When we have children, as men in particular, our testosterone falls, and we have a greater chance to release oxytocin. So nature's helping us balance these factors. And yet, if you come in here and threaten me or threaten my kids, my testosterone can spike, or a version of testosterone can spike very rapidly, which gives me that energy to protect myself or somebody else. So again, for listeners, there's around 200 neurochemicals in your brain that are helping you roughly get through life, survive, reproduce, and generally be happy. And we can talk about why evolution wants humans to be happy, but happier people are more productive, they have more children, they're nicer to be around, they're better social creatures. And so this suite of 200 neurochemicals is at millisecond frequency bouncing around to help you adapt to the environment that you're in.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And you were kind of saying, people with better relationships would be, nicer people to be around. And we know that romantic relationships, that would be a big part in our lives. And some people might argue, like if I have a partner, that means I probably release more oxytocin than people that don't have a partner. Would that be the case, do you think? Or there's some caveat to it?
It's the opposite, actually. If you have a long-term partner, you release less oxytocin when you see him or her. Why?
Right.
The brain's very stingy. It takes a lot of resources to run your brain. And so once I've been married 27 years. Once I've realized my wife is safe, then I don't need to release oxytocin. I have those memories, which are very cheap to activate. That lady walking down the street, that's my wife. I don't have to release oxytocin to tell me to interact with her because I have the memories of that. So again, this is very, think of this evolutionary system. I don't want to waste resources. So we see bigger oxytocin releases when we have very unusual or interesting interactions with someone we know, or hence the helicopter ride, or when we see a stranger and we're trying to assess unconsciously, person's safe, they like me. And so, Lou, we all do this standard thing when we go to a conference or someplace, a cocktail party, we don't know people. You try to find that commonality. Oh, you went to college there? Hey, so did I. What year did you graduate? I was right. Or Bob? Yeah, I know Bob, great guy, right? So we're trying to show that we are part of the same group. So therefore, we should be safe to be around. And that's what we found in my work with criminals, that's what criminals will do as well when they want to take advantage of you. They will try to embed themselves in a social group so that you accept them. And so again, you've always got to be a little bit skeptical when someone goes, Bob, I don't know any Bob. What are you talking about, Bob? Right. So, so the system can be abused.
Very interesting, because that would make people without a partner or a long-term partner feel so much better, because they're like, okay, now my brain's going to work harder to release oxytocin, and that makes me happier, perhaps. And, that's something that probably would be interesting to hear, especially in this, today's day and age. I don't know about, where you are in the world. Where I am, we're pretty much, really relaxed and sort of like chill with whatever it is that our friends are doing. But when I was visiting my family, I was telling you about this earlier, visiting my family during the holiday, and everyone's like, when are you getting married? Do you have a boyfriend? Like, that's just like the main focus. Right. And if I can throw this oxytocin conversation, in that discussion, it would have made the discussion so much more interesting. But I think the reason for that is probably because they didn't know about these things, hence why they think that having a partner would make you so much happier. And I think that's so fun to hear. So just a side note from from myself to any of people in our audience that might be, like anyone who might be struggling with this, like myself, might find this to be really fun, and this could be a conversation starter. Anyway, so you also mentioned, between individuals. This is important, right? So we talked about romantic relationships already. Now, what about individuals? Because we know that it's not just about romantic relationships. These neurochemicals exist in all relationships. And in fact, it helps when you meet new people, in situations where it's going to help you to release more oxytocin. So how can we leverage this? Especially, you mentioned this earlier, going to a cocktail party. I'm an introvert. I feel terrified whenever I have to go to a conference, to a networking event. Like, I'm that person in the corner just hoping for the event to end. So how can we leverage the understanding that we have about oxytocin right now to help us, maybe enhance, how this chemical is released, or, just improve our interactions in general?
Yeah, I'm an introvert too, but I run lots of experiments on myself to see how I can still be an effective social human.
Yeah.
One thing is like name tags. Like if you have a name tag, someone will walk over to Lou. Well, that's an interesting name. Where's that come from? Right. So name tags are easy. I think just smiling at people, having something that's a shared experience. So sometimes when you go to conferences, they'll have indicators like lives in California, went to the University of Pennsylvania, something. And so then again, we can do the same thing. I can go, oh, I lived in California 10 years ago. Where do you live? Right. So you have ways to kind of open up that conversation. But more generally, I think it's just saying hi to people. So some years ago, I decided to see what happened when I said hi to people in elevators. So for some reason, in every country I've ever been in, if you're in this box going up and down in a hotel or something, people pretend like no one else is there. And I think it's weird. So I decided just to say hi to people. And what I found was that about half the people freak out, which also makes me happy. And the other half, I had this really interesting conversation, like, oh, where are you, like at a hotel or conference? Like, where are you in from? Oh, yeah, Toronto. I was there like last month. It was so cold. Like, oh, it's been so cold. So you have this little conversation. It's pleasant. So I think what's nice about this social connection system, Lou, is it's very trainable. It's adaptable. Mm-hmm. And so the point of having a goal, a ring to close for emotional fitness is to help everybody improve their social connections, whether those are new connections or strengthen existing connections. So we get the benefit, as I said, I think twice before now, of a healthier, longer, and happier lifespan. Like that's the goal of life. And we can do that again by reaching out. So it could be bring the host a bottle of wine or some flowers or anything that says I care about you. Think of me at the Four Seasons, right? All I want to do is have them give a crap that I'm coming back and spending money at their hotel and show some reciprocation. Not like, you suck, we're going to be here, we don't care about you. As opposed to, you're special, you're interesting.
Yeah.
So by the way, one of my tricks is I really like languages. I speak badly a bunch of languages, but also dialects. And so if I'm in the US, which is again, big country, I'm sure it's the same in Australia, I can pick up on dialects. I go, oh, are you from Kentucky? Because that sounds like, and they're like, holy crap, how do you know that? I'm like, I'm a weirdo, but I like dialects. And then boom, now I got something to talk about, right? Oh yeah, you're from Kentucky. Oh, that's interesting. Well, yeah, I was there a couple of years ago. And where do you live? And what's it like? So it doesn't have to be profound. It just has to be some little in where you can say, hey, you're interesting. Let's hang out.
Yeah. That's very fun. I like that. I think it's hard, right? Because especially for the introverts, maybe for the extroverts, it's a bit easier to strike these conversations, gain trust, or feel safe in a new environment. But for the introverts, I think it's much harder. So having these little tools and tips would really help. Because I'm like at a social event, I'm just like, okay, I'll just wait here. If someone approaches me, I'll talk to them. If not, I'll just buzz right out of here. So that is good to know because, now that we get events again, we start to go out again, that really helps. And I'm also one of those people that if I'm in an elevator, I just have my headphones on and pretend no one else exists. That's just easier for me. But I also know that it's actually much better for us socially, especially with the neurochemical, we're talking about oxytocin, to actually strike up a conversation or, make friends with your neighbors, things like that. It's actually hard to achieve.
Right.
But
so you've got to exercise the system, right? You've got to force yourself to do it. And here's the health benefits. Oxytocin reduces cardiovascular stress, improves the immune system. So we are really built to be around others, even though you and I are both introverts. Right. I say I'm an introvert and I play an extrovert on TV. So we're like right now, I'm chatting away. But I think even for introverts, but more importantly for people who are kind of chronically lonely, again, there's so many things you can do, but even this isn't bad, Lou. So what we found is that interactions in this 2D world, video conferencing, give you between 50 to 80% of the immersion as in-person interactions. So, join a group, help somebody out, volunteer at kids' school, do whatever it takes to exercise those social connection muscles will strengthen that oxytocin release. So we do find that people who are by personality more empathic and more agreeable release more oxytocin for every experience they have. So more oxytocin than people who are less empathic and less agreeable. They're the warm people. They're people, right? They're people you and I kind of hate in a little way because they're so relaxed around others and they can do everything. But we can become warmer. So I've worked very hard on that myself. It's not my nature. Some years ago, I turned 50. I had 4 surprise birthday parties.
Oh, wow.
Not because I'm so wonderful, but because I invested in relationships, and randomly 4 different events I was at, people had birthday cake for me. So that's the goal, right? Is that you've made that investment in other people so that they reciprocate and invest in you.
Yeah, that's very sweet. And I think it's the same thing happened to me when I had my birthday in December. I had 3 different birthday parties, actually 4.
People
and
love you. Look at this.
Yeah, but I'm an introvert, right? Same as you. I was like, oh, I didn't think. But then again, investing in relationships. And I have a feeling the introverts might be better at investing in relationships deeply. Now, I'm not sure there's research behind this. I just have a feeling because I talk to a lot of introverts and extroverts. Not sure if that's the case. I'm not sure if you know about this.
They tend to have fewer friends, but the friendships they have tend to be deeper, right? So when you find a friend, you're like kind of really invested in them. Where extroverts have lots of friends, but they tend to be less, the quality of those relationships tend to be a little bit weaker. So yeah, benefits, cost benefits of everything. By the way, find an extrovert friend and then he or she will just take you all around and you'll meet everybody. So that's another trick.
Yeah, that's what I did at one of the events recently. My friend Taz was just like dragging me around. I'm like, Lud, have you met this person? And I'm like, no, hi. And then, it's just continue on like that for about 20 rounds. So I ended up meeting a lot of new people. That was draining by the end, but definitely it helps because I felt really included and involved in what was happening around me. And now that we have talked about oxytocin, I was like, okay, definitely oxytocin was released during those interactions because, I've got a friend, I felt safe in these conversations and teaching me new things. Now, you mentioned this experiment for yourself, or not an experiment per se, but this experience and this thing that happened at the 4 Seasons. I think before we close this part, I would love to take that into discussion because a lot of people who are listening might take into their work in the sense that this would be so good for branding and for marketing, not just in our romantic relationships or individual one-on-one relationships with our circles. Companies can leverage this, to make their customers feel more engaged, fulfilled, like they will come back or they're more likely to recommend the service or, products. So what would be some of the key things that, someone who might be, they might be listening and they might be a CEO, they might be a marketing professional, they might learn from this. So what would you recommend to them to improve what they're doing at work?
Yeah, a couple quick take homes. Again, because the brain's lazy, even if I have a peak immersion experience, from a business perspective, I want to sustain that, whether it's in marketing, customer experience, or even employee experiences. And I can do that by using a narrative arc. So if I think of storytelling, where I have characters that are in some kind of situation that's unusual, and those characters have authentic emotions and some kind of tension, that as social creatures is fascinating to us. So there's no shortage of novels and movies coming out, right? We're not running out of those kinds of situations. And so really thinking about using a narrative arc in marketing, using it in creating customer experiences where I'm curating your experience so that you have more emotional connection to the experience and therefore to the business, I think is really important. The difficulty is that these systems in the brain are hidden from conscious awareness. So if you just ask people, hey, do you like this experience? Well, compared to what? So what we've done is create this technology. The free app is called Tuesday. You can get it at the App Store, download it to your phone, and you can actually measure your immersion second by second. So we're giving it away for free because we think everyone should build their emotional fitness. From a training and education experience, one more example, Lou, if I may, one of our longest users of the software we created is Accenture, a big global professional services company. And they have found, by measuring immersion in the $1 billion they spend annually to upskill their employees, that employees cannot stay immersed in training for more than 20 minutes without a change. So they have structured their training now into 20 20-minute segments. So maybe the facilitator talks for 20 minutes and then change. Then you do some table work and then a change. Then you watch a video, a change. Then you do a debrief. And because immersion is metabolically costly, they've also found that breaks need to be longer. So there's no reason that we should be subjected to the tyranny of the 60-minute clock. It looks like our brains are working more on this 15 or 20-minute kind of interaction. So really think about a shorter, more intensive training and education as opposed to longer. We all have learned how to sit on our butts for 3 hours. Doesn't mean it's efficient in terms of getting information into our brains.
Definitely. Well, that's so interesting. I think this is from our team's fancy words, what we can take home from neuroeconomics and neuromarketing. I guess these things really help, especially when you mentioned that experience you had at the Four Seasons and Starbucks. I just keep thinking about these things and they can be applied, right? Because we learn from these examples all the time with our personal experience. And sometimes it's hard to put ourselves, if we're, let's say, a brand, LMSL is a brand. We're creating these podcasts. We want to engage with our audience better. We can learn from this as well. Like how do we make sure that we are interacting with our audience in a meaningful way? Same as the way that we're interacting with our guests like Paul to make sure that he's happy. He's going to come back to us. He's going to recommend our podcast, things like that. So thank you so much for your insights. And your book sounds really interesting. I'll definitely put that on my reading list. And hopefully our audience will do the same. Now, let's get into something a bit more practical for our audience. We've talked about a lot of theories and, I think you probably gave us 20 tips so far, on different fronts of our lives. But if our audience is kind of like, okay, I know what they're talking about, but I'm still a little confused. I don't know what I'm going to do after today, listening to this podcast. What would be one practice that you recommend to our audience so that they can enhance their oxytocin?
I have recommended publicly many times 8 hugs a day. Try to get 8 hugs, 8 different people every day to train yourself to release more oxytocin. You'll connect to people. They'll smile. It's a wonderful human thing to do.
Fantastic. That's really great. Now, some people might struggle, like myself, though. So the challenge here, and I know for a lot of people might be the same, I work from home on most day. I don't see anyone apart from my housemate and sometimes 1 or 2 colleagues. Other than that, I'll probably just go do some sports or go to the gym. Now, 8 hugs a day might be a challenge for me. Because, I'm just not going to go to my gym randomly and hug the receptionist, right? It's going to be a little bit awkward. So how can we overcome such challenges?
Right. I think it's just taking time to have a conversation, right? So, think of one person that you can see. So I go to the gym in the mornings. I see the same people. I'm there. I have my headphones on. I'm working out. I don't want to talk, but I'll say hi to 3 or 4 people quickly. I have a new rule, Lou, which is I am trying to tell at least one person per day that I love them. So that's a tough rule. Again, it could be in this broad sense. It could be like your friends, and it can feel a little bit awkward sometimes. But as long as I understand what you mean, particularly when you have like same gender friends. Like I'm old, so all my friends are old dudes like me. And so, when I see my friends, I'm like, hey, Bob, I love you. And they're like, yeah, I love you too, man. Like, whatever. So like, making sure that people can express that I'm open enough emotionally to say, hey, I love you, I care about you. You could use care, or I think you're wonderful, or sometimes I say, you're just awesome. You're an awesome human. Thank you. Like that kind of connection where you're opening up, and then people will reciprocate and open up as well. So how about finding one person in the gym you can say hi to when you go?
Yeah, definitely. That's easy enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. That sounds great. Got to work our way up somehow, right? It's going to be hard and awkward at the beginning, but we'll work our way up. All right. So now that we have covered both our, theoretical aspects of oxytocin and love, and also a little practice, it's about time to close. But before we go, we have open mic. This is your platform to talk about anything you are passionate about or anything you would like to share with our audience. Maybe we didn't have room for it during the conversation. So this is your platform, Paul, all yours. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Lou. And thanks for everyone who stuck around to listen, I guess. I am passionate about improving mental health and happiness by helping people build their emotional fitness. So you download the Tuesday app. It's free. We're not collecting any data on you. It all goes in the cloud and then disappears. So I think by having tools that let us capture that 4th leg of the increasing your lifetime happiness ability, which is the quality of relationships, having a measure of that, having something you can improve on is in my view, the most important thing I've ever done. And so I'm passionate about helping people live happier, healthier, longer.
Yeah. Wow. Beautiful. Well, thanks so much, Paul, for sharing that information. And it sounds like a wonderful tool that we can try. And you said App Store. So would that be available to both iOS and Android users?
iOS currently, we're working on Android now. So I don't know when this comes out, but we're in January. So by March, we'll have Android. So March
perfect.
2024. Hey, this is evergreen, can last forever. And let's try this with each other, Lou, right? Lou, You're awesome. Thank you for having me on. What a pleasure to spend an hour with you. It was really fun.
Yeah, same to you, Paul. You're a wonderful guest and it has so much fun talking to you. Really appreciate your time, especially for coming back, after the difficulties we had last year. Great beginning to the year and we've made it till the end. So, really appreciate that. Now, if our audience would like to find out more about your work, which website should they go to?
You can go to getimmersion.com, immersion with an I, or pauljzak.com.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much again for joining us today, Paul. And honestly, I feel like there's so much more we can talk about. Hopefully we'll get you back some other time to talk about another aspect that, you probably have written in one of your 4 books. You have been listening to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast produced by the Happiness Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website, ha.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.